We continue now at the top of Daf Gimel Amud Aleph in Meseches Sotah. This is Sotah Daf 3a. And the previous Amud, the Gemara offered two opinions in terms of the word kinoi, where it comes from. And both opinions had to do with the fact that the language of kinoi has to do with kina, it has to do with anger. And the Gemara says, Alma Kasavri, you see that they hold the Asr Lekanos, that it's really prohibited L'chatzchila. A husband is not supposed to give this warning to his wife. Rashi says, Alma Kasavri do Asr Lekanos, Kevan da Amri Lashon Hatolas Kinu, since the Amoraim and the previous Amud are saying that the word kinoi is a language of making anger between people, so Alma Asr. So you see that it's really Asr L'chatzchila. It's not a good thing for a person to do kinoi by his wife, to warn his wife in terms of having seclusion with another man. Uman damar mutter lekanos. Now the one who says that it's mutter for the husband to warn his wife, so ma'u lashon kinoi. So what is this language of kinoi? And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Ein kinoi elo lashon hasra. The word kinoi is actually a language of warning. He's actually warning his wife not to go into seclusion. V'chein hu omer, and likewise it says in the pasuk, V'yikane Hashem la'artzo, that Hashem warned his land. This was talking about the warning in Sefer Yoel. He was warning the locusts, so to speak, not to attack the land. Rashi over here says, Vayikane Hashem la'artzo, hisra biyolak v'chasil v'gazim shalo yashchiso esartzo. It's a warning again to the locusts that they should no longer destroy the land. The v'shiluach govoy mishtoi parshal el. That's what the pasuk is talking about in that particular section. And the Gemara continues, Tanya, we learned in a Braisa, Hayer Rabbi Meir, Omer Rabbi Meir would say, Adam over Avera b'seiser, a person commits a transgression in Avera in private, v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu machers olav b'goli, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu announces it in public. Shenemar, like the pasuk says, v'avar olav ruach kina. It says v'avar olav ruach kina in the Parsha of Sotah. V'ein avira el lashon achraza. The word avira is a language of announcing. It becomes public. Shenemar, like the pasuk says, Vayitzav Moshe vayaviru kol b'machane. Moshe instructed, he gave this command throughout the camp. You see, it's an idea of saying something publicly. Reish Lakish says, Ein Adam over Avera elim kei nichnas bo ruach shtus. A person doesn't commit a sin unless he has a ruach shtus, a spirit of foolishness that overtakes him. Shenemar ishish ki siste ishto. It says, again, talking about the Parsha of Sotah, but sishte ksiv, you can read it as sishte, like shtus, like shota. Again, this idea of a spirit of foolishness that envelops the person. And the Gemara continues, Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, it was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, Mivnei Maha Emina Torah Eid Echad B'Sotah. Why is it that the Torah believes one aid when it comes to Sotah? Sharaglaim L'Davar, the reason is because it seems to be that this actually did happen. Sharei Kino Lav in Istera, because you have a situation where he warned her and she went into seclusion anyways. V'Eid Echad Me'ida Shitameh, and now you have one aid saying that she was defiled, and therefore it is apparent that this actually did occur. Amar le Rapapa le Abaye, Rapapa said to Abaye, ki chsiva kinoi, basar stira v'tumah hu dechsiva. But the problem is that the pasuk that talks about kinoi, it's written after it talks about seclusion and after it talks about defilement. So how do we understand that pasuk? And the Gemara answers, Amar le, he said back to him, V'avar ukvaravar. The way we understand the word v'avar is, already he had warned her before. You have to understand it, that it happened before the stira and tumah. And the Gemara says, Ela me'ata, but according to that, we have another example of the word v'avar. It says, v'avar lachem kol cholutz. This is talking about by Ruvain and Gad. It says that they're going to go in, they're going to go into the land of Eretz Yisrael. They wanted to have the land on the other side of the Yarden, so they would go ahead and they would have to fight for the land of Eretz Yisrael. So hachanami, there also we should say that they've already entered the land, but that's clearly not true. Clearly it was talking about in the future tense over there. So how could it be that v'avar sometimes means it already happened, and sometimes it means in the future? And so the Gemara answers, there from the context of the pasuk, it talks about the land being conquered, and after that you will return to this other side of the Yarden. So it's clear that we're talking in the future. In other words, you can understand the meaning of the word based on the context of the pasuk. But over here, if you're going to actually read the pasuk as it is written, and the warning comes after, that wouldn't make any sense. If V'avar is going to be after the tumah and the stira, what would be the point of warning after the tumah and the stira occur? It has to be that the word v'avar means that it already happened. It already happened before. And the Gemara continues, Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, it was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, Ein Adam mekane leishto elim kei nichnasa bo ruach. The person does not warn his wife unless he has some kind of spirit that enters him. Shenemar, like the pasuk says, v'avar alav ruach kina v'kina ishto. It uses the word ruach. It means a spirit. And the Gemara says, my ruach. Well, what is the nature of this spirit? Rabbanan amri ruach tumah. Rabbanan say that we're referring to an impure spirit. that would be according to the idea that it's not a good thing, lechatchila, for a person to warn his wife. Rav Ashi says, ruach tahara, we're talking about a pure spirit that would follow according to the understanding that it is a positive thing. It is a good thing to issue this kind of warning because it makes it that the woman is not going to be able to commit the saveira of adultery. And the Gemara says it makes sense to follow the one who says that it's actually a pure spirit, that it's a good thing to issue this warning. The Tanya, as we learned in a brayso of Vikine Esishto, it says he warns his wife, Rishus Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. So Rabbi Shmuel says it's not an obligation for him to do it, but he has permission to do it. And Rabbi Akiva Omer Chova, Rabbi Akiva says it's even an obligation. So if you're going to say that it's a pure spirit, it makes sense. It's either something you're allowed to do, it's something that's an obligation, that makes sense. But if you're going to say it's an impure spirit, would the Tanoim talk about the fact that something is permitted or something is an obligation that a person should purposely bring into his soul an impure spirit? That wouldn't make any sense. So obviously we're talking here about something that is considered good. It's considered from a pure spirit. And the Gemara continues, Gufa, returning to what we just said above. Vikine Esishto, again, this Machlokas Tanoim, he warns his wife, Rishus Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says he has permission to do so. For Rabbi Akiva Omer Choven, Rabbi Akiva says it's an obligation to do so. And similarly, we have the same Machlokas in other contexts. Lo Yitama by a Kohen, it talks about the fact that he can become Tameh to his relatives. To her, he can become Tameh. That also same Machlokas Tanoim. Rishus Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says he has permission to do so. For Rabbi Akiva Omer Choven, Rabbi Akiva says it's an obligation. And also in another context, Liolam Bohem Tavodu, by the Eved Kanani, it says that you're going to work them forever. So Rishus, again, Rabbi Shmuel, Divrei Rabbi Shmuel says he has permission to keep them as slaves forever. Rabbi Akiva says Chova, no, it's an obligation. A person is not supposed to free the Eved Kanani. It's an obligation to keep them as an Eved forever. Amar le Rav Papa li Abaya, Rav Papa said to Abaya, V'yamri lo Rav Mesharshi le Rava. Some have the version that it's Rav Mesharshi said to Rava. Leima Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Akiva b'chol Torah kula hachi pligi. Let us say that Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, they argue in the entire Torah this way. Demar Amar Rishus, Amar Machover. One of them, Rabbi Yishmael, will always interpret everything as you have permission, and the other one will always interpret everything that it is an obligation. And that doesn't really make any sense, because if that was the case, Rabbi Yishmael would never have any mitzvahs aseh. There would never be any obligations in the Torah, which of course is not true. So what exactly are they arguing about? And the Gemara says, Amar Le, he said back to him, Hacha b'kroi pligi. Over here, they're really arguing in terms of these specific psukim. There are indications in the psukim in various directions, whether it's a Rishus or Chova, that's what they're arguing about. And the Gemara goes through each example. V'kine es ishto Rishus, Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva Omer Chova. Again, he warns his wife by the Sotah. According to Rabbi Shmuel, it means he has permission to do so, and according to Rabbi Akiva, it's an obligation. And so the Gemara now says, my time with Rabbi Shmuel. What's the reason of Rabbi Shmuel? Again, in general, shouldn't we understand anything in the Torah as a commandment, as a chova? What's the reason why Rabbi Shmuel says this is a rishus? And to that, the Gemara answers, Savar Loki Aitana de Tanya Rabbi Shmuel. He holds like the Tana of the following brisa. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Klape sha'amra Torah lo sisna esachicha bilvavecha. Torah already says that a person, you can't hate your brother in your heart. So Yachol Kagon Zu, I might think that extends in this case as well. Let's say you have a situation of a husband who suspects his wife. Talmud Lomar V'yavar Olav Ruach Kina V'Kinei Esishto. That's why the pasuk is saying that he warns his wife in this particular case. So it's actually, he has permission to do so, even though in general there's an obligation not to hate another individual. For Rabbi Akiva says, he responds, Kinoi Achrina Ksiv. It actually says Kinoi a second time, and therefore that second time already tells you not only is it something that he has permission for, but it is something that it is an obligation. And Rashi over here says, Yachol af zekein. Again, I might think the hatred applies here also. Sheyiras ishto veres al das Yehudis nisteres im shchinel lo yikanei. Maybe he shouldn't really warn her, because the Torah says you shouldn't bring yourself to a situation of hatred and fighting. Talmud Lomer V'kinei im rodzu l'kanei rishus biyado. So that's how Rabbi Shmuel understands it. V'kinei gives him permission to do so he can warn his wife. Umishum di lo chsiv krahav amina dasaru. The point over here is, without the pasuk, I would have thought it's forbidden. The Yom Rabbi Shmuel hacha rishus. That's why Rabbi Shmuel says here it's a rishus. Aval b'chol mitzvahs aseh shebetorah lo amar hachi. But in other mitzvahs aseh in the Torah, he wouldn't say that. He would say those are obligations. And Rabbi Akiva responds, Kinoi achrina ksiv. It says Kinoi again. V'yavar olav ruach kina v'kinei is ishto v'hilo nitzma. And so therefore we understand chad l'rishus v'chad l'chova. One is going to say that it's permitted, and then it goes one step further, according to Rabbi Akiva, and says it is even an obligation. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Shmuel, how does Rabbi Shmuel respond to that? Since the pasuk needs to write, and she's impure, and she's not impure, she's defiled, she's not defiled, so ksiv nami v'kinei es ishto l'chidet Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael. So it also adds in again and repeats V'kinei Ishto for what is taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. The Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, because it's taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, called Parsha Shenemra V'nishnis. Anytime you have a parsha that was said once and repeated, Lo Nishnis Ela B'Shvil Davar Shenis Chadish, but it's being repeated because there is some kind of added chiddush. Rashi explains, Rabbi Yishmael Amar Lach Aidi Deboy Lemichta V'hi Nitma V'hi Lo Nitma. Pasuk needs to repeat itself, so to speak, anyway, because it needs to talk about the fact that she's defiled, she's not defiled. What that means is Shesafaku B'Yadenu. Means to say, even though in this situation over here by Sotah, we're not really sure what happened. We're not sure whether she's defiled. V'Afal Pichein Asra HaKasav. Nevertheless, the Torah says it is forbidden. She went into seclusion with this man, and it creates an Isser. Asra HaKasav misafik. Kasav Nami V'kinei Achrin. So once it already has to add that idea, so we write in this V'kinei, this other word V'kinei. V'afagav demotzi l'mechtav hachi v'avar olav ruach kina v'kinei esishto v'hi nitma o lo nitma, even though it could have written v'avar olav ruach kina v'kinei esishto v'hi nitma o lo nitma, it didn't need to write it as it wrote it. Again, the way that the pasuk actually wrote it is v'hi nitma v'hi lo nitma. It didn't need to say that. It could say o lo nitma. Afilu hachi orchi dekra lachzor v'lishnos as amar. The point over here is sometimes the pasuk goes back and repeats things because you're already repeating it. There's some kind of chiddush, and so therefore once we're repeating for the chiddush, so we repeat here as well. And what Rashi is referring to over here is the full pasuk is v'yavar alav ruach kina v'kinei esishto v'hi nitma. So it talks about the kinoi by v'hi nitma, and then it repeats itself and it says o avar alav ruach kina v'kinei esishto v'hi lo nitma. Then by v'hi lo nitma it also repeats and says ruach kina v'kinei esishto. That's the repetition, and the point is again, since we're repeating anyway to teach you this idea that even though there's a suffix, there's going to be a prohibition. So therefore we repeat the entire phrase, and it's not, according to Rabbi Yishmael, it's not to teach you that there's an obligation of kinoi. And the Gemara continues and explains the next machlokas between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, lo yitama by a Kohen. It says he can become tamei to the relatives. So again, Rishus, he has permission to do so. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva says chov, it's not just that he has permission, but it's actually an obligation. And the Gemara again says, my time with Rabbi Yishmael, what's the reason of Rabbi Yishmael? Aidi dechsiv emor la kohanim b'nei Aaron v'yamarta aleihem lenefesh lo yitama b'yamav. Since it already says by the kohanim that they're not allowed to become tummy mace, so it's strichel l'michtav lo yitama. That's why he needs to say lo yitama, to say that here there's permission when it's a relative. There's permission for him to become tummy. Rabbi Akiva responds, Michi im l'sheiro nafka. The pasuk already says ki im l'sheiro. It already says that to the relatives he's allowed to become tummy. Lo yitama lamali. So what's the purpose of lo yitama l'chova? That's to say that it is an obligation that he has to tend to their burial and become tamei. Rabbi Yishmael lo mitame ve'in mitame levoreh. But Rabbi Yishmael says no, the lo yitame actually it's not to teach you that it's an obligation, but it's to teach you that he's mitame to her, but he's not mitame to her evarim, to her limbs. And Rashi over here explains, Lo yitama imesa ve'eno metame le'evorea emechad me'elu mukashchin ve'evarav noflin ein metame lehen. Let's say you have a situation where the limb comes off the body, Ever menachai. So for that, to tend to that burial, the Kohen is not supposed to become tamei. The kaimelan bor vorot Ever menachai metame ke'ever min hames. We know Ever menachai, it creates tumah just like Ever min hames ve'itzrich la lemut evorea. So therefore you need the term over here, la, in order to exclude the limbs, to say that the becoming tamei is only if the relative actually dies, but not for the Evarim, not for the limbs. We will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Gimel Amud Beis.